is it okay for us to walk around pretending to be okay when we're not? Why is that? What do we gain from that? Any takers?
I don't really think it's okay. I think we have conditioned ourselves to make it okay. And I like to reference it as we wear masks. We wear the mask to cover ourselves up because we're afraid for people to see who we really are. And I think the reason why we're afraid to be vulnerable and transparent is because we may not be accepted. People may reject us. So it's better to stuff it than to let it out. So I definitely wouldn't say it's okay to do it. And I believe many of us that do it, because I believe we're all guilty of it, wearing our mask. When we come home, Gladys Knight sings a song, when you're home alone, the walls tend to come down on you, right? And she was talking about from an intimate thing, but I'm looking at it from a mental health thing. When we come home and we close that door and we have to deal with our authentic self, knowing that we weren't able to release, it causes us a lot of pain, whether we internalize it, whether we drink, whether we overly eat, it comes out in some form. It's not okay. But I think the reason why we make it okay is because many people are afraid to have those tough conversations.
I love that. I mean, I really feel like, and from my own experience, walking around pretending to be okay was the thing you were encouraged to do. And I just want to clarify for those who are going to be watching this is not about vilifying parents who did their best. I know as a community, oftentimes Black people feel very protective of their elders and of their families, and the adults that were loving them and trying to make them the best that they could be. But I do feel like there are norms that really were about not being transparent. You would be considered things like uppity, getting too big for your britches. Don't you try to know too much about grown folks, and really understanding your lane. And these things I think are really typical of families that may have been struggling financially, but also were struggling with societal imbalances that were brutal, to say the least. So what do I gain from walking around pretending to be okay? I get to fit in. I get to feel like I fit in. I get to feel the hope that I'm going to meet my new next sister. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit of an addiction, but that's, if truth be told, that's a lot of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. True. So true.
Right. I'd like to say, I agree with both of what you're saying, but I feel like for me, it does more damage than good. Because what happens when you're wearing this mask and you still don't fit in? You still don't feel like, you're on the level with everyone else, and then you still can't speak about it, and I believe that it's in certain people, it's just kind of, it's almost like you're a ticking time bomb to break down or blow up, and I think that's why it's so important that we have discussions like this, because you don't really know what people's mental state is from time to time. So it's definitely not okay. And I think, I don't know how it could happen, but, conversations like this, of course, but we need to really start talking about it and checking in with each other, because you don't know how much of that fuse is left. And, what that looks like could be sometimes fatal,
If it's okay, Janelle, what you said is so key. So many people walk around with the imposter syndrome. They're not leveling up. And if they feel like somebody else is here and then they walk into the room, they feel like they don't qualify. So sometimes we just walk around as if so. And again, when I go back to that mask, we wear it. And like you said, even though you wear a mask, you still may not feel comfortable.
I feel like part of my experience is, I feel like I, for a long time, have been the person that shows up, and I'm not saying this is a superior thing, but I'm always straight up when I roll in a room or, in church or school growing up or my community, and what it has done, and learned it from my mother and my grandmother and grandfather. And these would be my white family. And they were very much outspoken in this community amongst their white counterparts in their community. And then being mixed race here. So I already felt isolated from speaking mind. And what's interesting, moving to New York City, I felt more comfortable with showing up, and in the art as an artist and as an educator in the communities I've been in, it was more acceptable. Coming back home now, what's interesting in this time in our political climate over the last 4 years, being here in Eastern Kentucky, Southern Ohio, showing up as the woman who's speaking out, as the woman of color, it brought up so many feelings of isolation. And I think my depression started again, which reminded me of growing up here at 13 and 14. And I thought I had mastered some of that. And so I didn't feel like I had a lot to gain from keeping it on, but what I realized is keeping it off and being back here, I had to really go back in therapy, because it went deeper in that well to pull out something that I thought I had dealt with, or thought I had, not control, y'all, but you know what I'm saying. So that's my experience with that.
And, Bridget, I know when we started having this conversation, and again, for those who are watching this, voice dialogue is a very specific process. It very much is to help us recognize the different parts of our primary selves, but also those unheard voices that are inside of ourselves that may have been shunned, and we've had to hide them as a result. So Bridget, through the lens of the final eight phenomenon and us discovering different parts of ourselves, and we're talking about the Black culture today specifically, Mitzi and Janelle and myself have really been able to experience the final eight phenomenon work and the intensive. Can you just tell us a little bit about anything that comes to mind within this framework?
Yeah, I'm agreeing with everything I'm hearing, and the idea of, even with voice dialogue, we have different parts, and the voice dialogue technique is you talk to them, and you use the word mask, Dr. Tina, and I would say voice dialogue would say the part of you that wears a mask. And because it's true that the selves come out of your essence, but if it's not safe to express your essence, then those are actually protective parts. But protecting for what? In other words, if you had to get through a tough few blocks to get to your school, and you needed to, I don't know, bring out your big bear energy, that was good. But if you're not able or allowed, or there's no space for you to drop it, then it's problematic for your own self. And so voice dialogue helps you learn about these parts of you. And also that a few things, it's just, I'm just feeling the vulnerability of everything everyone is saying. Within the way voice dialogue looks at it, within every baby is born with their unique blueprint of potentiality and their essence. And some of that's biological. You have babies who love stimulation and other ones that like a little less stimulation. And so these parts come out of that. And so when you have to protect yourselves all the time, you're actually making a big fence between yourself and yourself. And that's what I think you were talking about, Dr. Tina, earlier. Then you have to go to therapy and get help, or voice dialogue, any number of ways to kind of remove this fence so you get to know yourself. But a lot of times you have to honor it wasn't safe. As it wasn't. You're going to either be put down in some way, but then as you get older and meet other people that say, okay, well, let's make a safe space if it's not safe. Let's be active about safety for expression. And also, Mitzi and I have talked about this. Let's say you decide, your activists say, I don't care. I'm going to throw it out there, and they have to deal with it. And I know they're not going to like it. That's great. But then for your own mental wellness, make sure you have the parts of you that can tolerate being rejected, being the scapegoat. It's like you can choose to be all that because that's important and will affect change in a way you care about. But I think more and more activists that I work with in the young generation, which I'm thrilled about, they actually say to each other, you know, you're not doing enough self-care. If you want to be an activist for many decades, you've got to practice this mental wellness. And I see my 20-year-old clients speaking to each other that way. And I'm so heartened because they're correct. It's almost like an instrument of control to get one so exhausted and their esteem so corroded, they're easier to control. They're not going to have their brain power to like come up with a great plan, to have the energy to follow through all the way. So those are some of my thoughts about what we're talking about in voice dialogue and its empowerment personally, but also how it can move out works.
Yes, and I definitely feel like one of the reasons I felt really inspired to talk to this specific group of women today is that we can all speak to that and know, and you can chime in if this isn't correct, but there's this collective awareness from my own Black experience, and that I've received the feedback from several other people that we are just as concerned about the body of citizens in the United States that are affected, that have to make it through these structures. So that's a perfect segue into this next question that I'll read. Please feel free to jump in, chime in.
I think Dr. Tina wanted to say something.
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. I'm over here reading and can't see you.
Exactly.
Bridget, I love when you spoke about the fences, right? And it made me think about when I see clients and we go into our deep dialogue, most of the time a 20-year-old may present to me what they dealt with at 8 years old. So I'm dealing with their inner child at 8. Because of those fences, they learn different defense mechanisms to protect themselves. They built that fence around. And then when they actually come into the therapeutic room where they feel safe and we form an alliance, then the fences start falling down. Yeah. And that 20-year-old is now revealing their 9-year-old self that's been hurt or whatever the story is. And they actually feel safe to have that dialogue, and they feel safe to leave that fence down so the real healing can take place. So I love when you talked about that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm headed towards maybe some foggy eyes. So, don't be shy about it. And I'll try not to be either. This is a real biggie for me.
Mm-hmm.
What are the messages in our environments that prevent Black people from acknowledging that there's not always a quick fix for matters of mental wellness? And just to kind of skirt, just kind of jump on this, I do feel like one of the biggest discoveries I had in my life, I saw a lot of people struggling that were older than me during my early adolescence, including a sister that tried to commit suicide at a very early age. And I don't think, I think society is improving, but I don't think that we're always safe. Mm-hmm. And we're not always encouraged to be soft. People love the thunder of Black women. Mm-hmm. They love our boldness, our attitude when we're pushed too far. They love our physiques and our curves and all of our different cultural components. But at the end of the day, that doesn't mean that this world is safer for us. And so I often am having this experience. People have the impulse, whether they mean well or whether they are intentionally being horrible, but they love consuming us. It's not helping.
So we live in a microwave society, right? Everything is quick, fast. And that even comes with our health, our mental health. It's always fast. When you get a flat, let's get some Fix-A-Flat and pump it up some so we can keep on riding. Well, we know when you use Fix-A-Flat, it damages the tires and it's not long lived. I think most of the time that's what people want. They want something quick. They want that microwave thing. But however, the problems that most of us are dealing with, that's you and me, right? It didn't happen quickly. It was over a period of time. So that's when we have to educate and do things like this to let people know it's not a quick fix. it may be a temporary fix, it may be a short-term fix, but here it is. When we're talking about our life and we're doing self-biology and me search, it's a long-term goal that we're looking at to put the pieces together. So it's not quick. It's something that, again, people need to be educated on, because now that you live in a microwave society, shucks, you can have a meal in like 2 minutes. You put it in the microwave, boom, it's ready, right? And that's how they want with up here. They want to be able to just have it when they want it. Like we got McDonald's and all that. And you see, when you eat McDonald's, right? I don't even know if it tastes good anymore because they changed the meat so much. But it's just like, it's quick, but it's not good for us. And I think being a mental health advocate and just out there, just educating people, letting them know that it's safe, letting them know it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. I get clients that come in, they was like, well, how many sessions you think I'm going to need? I'm like, well, let's sit down on the couch and let's see what you present with. And depending on what you present with and how diligent you are in doing the work for yourself, then maybe we can have some type of determination. We start out with a 90-day treatment plan, right? And it may go on, because once we start unpacking, it's like when you watch those home shows where they go in and redo a house. They think the budget is one thing, and the next thing you know, they take down the walls and they see mold, mildew. They're like, oh, we didn't plan for that. So now we got to get bleach. We got to do all that other stuff. That's how it is when we start unpacking. We don't understand like all the stuff that may come out of it. So I think really educating clients when they come in, I'm like, this ain't. And listen, I tell them, you know how you can go to a car wash and you can either ride through, or you can look in the car wash and you see people actually washing down your car. I said, that's the type of car wash when you come into my room. We both out washing the car. You're not going to be sitting in the car while I'm doing all the work. We both have to do the work so the true healing can take place. So I just think I really challenge people to be their best self, because I challenge myself. And of course, I'm going to challenge my clients. So people just want stuff.
Dr. Tina, oh my gosh, that makes me think about, I've been saying this over the past couple months, like all these IG posts about, move through it. You can do it. Don't be afraid. Do your thing, and I'm like, make choices, and I'm like, I've been putting on some very famous people who are life coaches, even like, okay, so yeah, I can make a better choice, a healthier choice, but let's talk about what it takes to get to that place. I swear, I'm so tired of it. It feels, I just learned this term, toxic positivity. Like, I'm not saying I want to stay depressed all my life or anything like that, because I've been doing the work for a long time, and who knew that, it was going to be a lifetime of being human. I think really I'm starting to formulate or accept or understand that it's about being human. And every time I have an interaction with someone new, it inspires, not triggers, inspires a new part of me. And so I don't know. And then if you believe in certain things about legacies, familial legacies, and then for some of us, past life legacies. So, you don't know at what day all these things coming in and enjoying, or I'm starting to get to the place now where I have some delight, not really, I don't like that word delight, but I'm starting to understand, like when relationships that used to scare me or I couldn't speak my mind, now I'm starting to go, hey, this is a lesson I've learned this lesson. Let me try to find my voice here. But it took a long time. and it's going to be a long time. And yeah, there's this McDonald's toxic positivity. Like, I can't stand these posts like that. Like, it didn't come quick, and just to honor that we really need to give ourselves that space just as much as anything else.
No, that's good. And that's also good, that because I think when people are authentic with themselves and they are going through something, they're afraid to speak up, because they're like, she's on happy land over here and I'm struggling trying to get to happy land, that we didn't realize that there was trials and tribulations to get there. It's not like boom, 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 and I'm happy, I'm up. It's a process, right? But so many people think it's instant, and it's sad. And like you said, those posts are just be happy, but it's like it's a transformation to be happy, right?
I also think people should on us. And as a culture, my wish and my dream and my hope is that we would start to be a lot more aware You should be strong. What you should do is dry up those tears. What you should do is power through. What's this vulnerability talk? What's this inner child talk? Grow up, be stronger, be bulletproof, be better. But there's a cost.
Yep.
And so it is important to be resilient. It is important to figure out the matrix of the professional worlds that unfortunately, really bind a lot of us in unhealthy ways. But it's the shoulding on ourselves as a community and the expectation that we will never feel, or the ridicule that may come up. Maybe there's people in our environment that are almost echoing what our own internal critics are doing on the inside. So they ridicule you for being soft. Ha ha ha, I made that girl cry. Yeah, she went in her office. And it really is this part of having cred for being super strong. And I just think that there's space for it all, including the strength, including the badassery. But I also feel like there's so much beauty that I've seen when people haven't even realized you are in such a beautiful moment right now. And I'm just silently loving you. I don't want to touch anything. I'm just like, wow, this is miraculous. And I had that experience when I witnessed my elders open up, or I made a friend that's tough may open up. So I just kind of wanted to echo in. And for those who are watching, ask yourselves these questions. You'd be surprised the answers you get.
I would like to say that both Mitzi and Dr. Tina, what you were saying about the microwave societies and posts on Facebooks, or Facebook, Instagram, all the social media that we are inundated with, we really need to make that part of our journey, our wellness journey, is to kind of disconnect a little bit, because we do see so many images coming in, or so many stories of people who have made it. I watched an interview yesterday, I think, and they were talking to a waitress who became a billionaire, and she had to say, wait a minute, this didn't happen overnight. I went through this, I went through that. And she wrote a book, and the book is all about all the bad things that happened and all the things, so she was just letting everyone know it's not going to be a quick fix. It doesn't happen overnight. And we get fed that so much that all you need to do is say affirmation 7 times for 30 days or whatever the case is. And there's so many of them. And I'm not speaking against affirmations. I'm trying to get that down myself as well. But it's just not as easy and quick as people make it out to be. And I think, I hate to say, I think it's because people are getting paid to kind of portray that. It's selling books, movies, getting
right, that's it.
yeah, like YouTube sponsorships and everything. And it's just, everybody is saying the same thing. Oh, just do this and you'll be okay. And I mean, I've been down that road, and I'm still hoping one day that I'm gonna say the right thing in the right way and snap 3 fingers and I'm be like, here's my billion. But it's really like we need to kind of unplug from all of that and do the work so that we can really make some steps to real self-help.
That was one of the things that always bothered me, that mantra, like just do a mantra, because it's all love. But if your core negative belief is nothing works out and you're worthless, then it's going to corrode the mantra. And that there's value in the working hard. I'm loving what I'm hearing. And that if you can own that you have parts of you that are like angry and hurt and also are smart, and they're like, sorry, the world just doesn't work that way. You're discounting through toxic positivity an entire at least 50% of experience and reality. Like, it's called cognitive dissonance. If you're really thinking about it, it doesn't work. And that was one of the reasons I wrote the book, because it's like I just felt I was missing something. And also, tell me your thoughts, but so much of the conversation didn't include culture and oppression and history of violence and active negating, as if it didn't exist, as if toxic positivity was enough. And that's like you said earlier about, some people, they're about to snap and they need help. They don't need more. They need a place where they can say, I'm suffering, so that they can be helped. Well, I think some people don't even know that they're at the verge of collapse because they've so bought into the message, they're disconnected from themselves. So I'm just agreeing. And I think this conversation is amazing because it's like, oh, even if there's a part of me that would like to have my microwaved happiness, I don't have to feel like I'm failing, but also it's a false standard. It's a market-driven standard. I love that.
Yeah. And, this really also just makes me think about, I had a conversation a couple of years ago, and I was really trying to power down with, hey, here's how I feel about this. And so I said to, an older white European American man, who I was working with at the time, I said, I just wish we'd stop the gaslighting. And so this gentleman said, what's that? And it was such a powerful moment for me as a Black woman and a woman of color. Here I was trying to be transparent. And here was this person with this luxurious privilege. He claimed in that moment to never have heard of the word. I don't know. I'll go ahead and just take him at that word. I think to me, this is a big part of my own personal journey. Those watching who have had or experienced adverse childhood experiences, a lot of the gaslighting can complicate our healing journey, because it's like you're hearing that narrative so often, whether it's in the media. Perfect point, Janelle. I used to watch Fantasy Island all the time, and everything was tied up into a perfect bow. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to marry Rourke when I grow up. I was sure I was going to marry him. That was my boo. I was like, first of all, but on a more serious note, these narratives really defined how I approached femininity, what I was comparing myself to. And so I just wanted to just kind of round that out. And so for those of us who have been gaslit, it's not just outside in basic society stuff. Oftentimes our families are struggling. So we're getting narratives and also extreme forms of discipline, which I don't want to leave out of this conversation, which help to shape our belief systems and our self-worth.
Was someone talking?
No, please jump in.
Okay. You just said something, with the Fantasy Island and the narratives that we get. And I have this conversation with my husband all the time. And I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like everyone is playing out some type of character that they've seen on some TV show or movie. And it's like, you have the people who are waiting for the zompocalypse to happen, and you have the people who are like, living in a romantic comedy and things like that. And it's like, we really just need to, again, how does this happen? Maybe conversations like this. Not only are we looking at those movies, but we have to understand there are two sets of movies. You have Black movies and white movies, right? I'll just say it that way, but of course there's more to it than that. But there's a certain type of Black movie that's been put out over and over and over again. We're starting to get different types of stories, but at the core, I believe people really just identify with media too much, that they're living out these roles. Just because you're from, South Central doesn't mean that you have to live out what you saw in what was that movie way back when?
Jews, Boys in the Hood.
Right. I was going to say fill in the blanks, right? So, And we kind of take that on as people. And I'm sure Black people and white people do the same thing, but speaking as a Black person, we identify with what we see here on this screen, whether it's, you know, Boys in the Hood or The Walking Dead or whatever, and we take on that as ourselves and try to act that out. And I think that's kind of a mental illness too, personally. And I guess one that we all struggle with. I mean, I've seen myself in Boomerang. I love that movie. And that's kind of what I'm like, you know what, that's the first movie where I saw like Black professionals. And that's always stuck with me. So I'm like, okay, I'm trying to boomerang this life, right? But yeah, so I think going back to my point, the media plays such a big role in our mental health, honestly.
Yeah, and I honestly feel like we have a couple of watch parties with the names of some of these favorite movies. So, you know, you guys hit me up because I'm ready for those watch parties.
Right, and it's something we've been doing since childhood, right? Like how many of us were a certain Care Bear, or how many of us were like, you know, what was it? Josie and the Pussycats.
Yes.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Josie and the Pussycats was one of my favorites. So it's like, oh, I'm this one, you know, I'm that one. And then everybody had their character and they really kind of lived through that.
Yeah, I agree.
Underoos.
Listen, I had a Wonder Woman underoos and wore it as Halloween one year with our small budget family. Okay, so I'm gonna jump into this next question. And by the way,
I'm gonna go back to something really
please.
2 or 3 things that were really profound to talk about.
Yes.
Some of us spoke just about the constant negating and oppression, forms of oppression, and that shape core negative beliefs, you know. And again, I keep referring to being in the city and then coming back home. I wasn't aware of how much I was negated on a regular basis growing up in my hometown. Like, so I had a false sense of the idea that I might be able to achieve my goals, you know, as a young person in a fairly safe environment. But how many times I was negated right at the moment, especially I think being light-skinned, sometimes people make assumptions that because we are in the inner circles with white folks or something, that it's going to be easier. It's not, because they still looking at you and like, no. And they're not saying it like that. They're like, oh, what? Gaslighting? No. Anyway, Buffy, can you go ahead? You know, and I'm like, whoa, what? Didn't I just train and do, and I'm here and I'm showing up? Okay, Buffy, go ahead. You know, and I'm like, so that's really something I thought was, I'm just realizing what it means. Maybe it was an intense oppression, but a constant negating is like that drip on your forehead, and that it's enough over time done has a really deep impact on your mental health and the way that you believe or see how you can achieve in the world. So, and thinking about the stories that you're told, I just said to my mother the other day, this staff member of ours came in and she said, I'm pregnant and I'm having a baby. And, you know, she's making, you know, in our area, $200,000 a year. That's a lot of money here. And I said to my mom later, and my mother's white, and I said, yeah, she's got a dream of a white girl story. Good for her.
It's funny when you talk about this. I go to different organizations and I train on diversity and inclusion and microaggressions. And it's funny how a lot of organizations diversify themselves, right? But they really don't include us. And it's like we have a seat at the table, but we don't get to talk, right? And what happens is it becomes very frustrating. I used to be a senior healthcare exec for years, and one day, two white men in charge of the hospital, the health system, came walking down the hallway, knocked on my door, and told me my services was no longer needed, right? When I asked them to explain to me why, they said they would figure it out, and they laughed, right? It was the most turning point of my life. And it was most humiliating because they laughed at me. And I was one of the few, or the only one at the time, African American, running a high revenue department. So I did imaging, radiology, and I oversaw nursing and respiratory. So my departments was very crucial. And I was fired. And it's funny because I remember my first time being bold and brave to speak about it, and I was with a colleague, or I used to call her a friend, but you know, they have a new term, frenemy, that she really wasn't a friend, and then I found out she was an enemy, and she looked just like me, and I would give her my hand, extend my hand to help her, not realizing she was biting it off of me. Long story short, we were at a conference together, and I presented, and I finally told my story, because, you know, when you get fired, you try to figure out a nice, classy way to say it that allow you for you to stay intact. Cause I wasn't healed. Like literally, I remember right before then going into the bathroom, just crying because I still was in pain, and I had to get up and stand in front of a bunch of people. And long story short, I shared my story. We talk about being transparent, vulnerable, and not really thinking about shame. Shared my story, and as soon as I came off the stage, the young lady that I just mentioned, that's a friend of me, she was like, "Oh my God, I didn't, you let it all out like that? Like, leave you told that story. I would never have told that story." La, 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 la. And it made me second guess myself, right? And then I thought about it, right? I said, I wasn't too heavy. I didn't want them to heal me. I kind of wanted them to know that sometimes we get knocked down even when we look like we got it all together. And it's a fight to get back up, but I'm slowly positioning myself to get there. And it took me a while to be able to tell the story. It took me about like 2 years to really to be able to tell that story. And it took me about like 2.5 years to go that same road, because I was having PTSD symptoms. Like when I would go past the hospital, I would start crying. When I would see people, I would start crying. Matter of fact, I would start talking about the place, like, "Hey, what's going on?" I really wanted them to say that the whole place fell apart because they fired me and they mistreated me, right? And all the patients was okay. I didn't want nobody to get hurt. I just wanted everything to fall apart. And it was just like when they talked about it, I just cried. But then I shared my story, and when she said that to me, I was like, should I tell this story again? But now that's part of my narrative, because I know that so many people went through what I went through. And when I hear stories, when Steve Jobs, his story, when I hear everyday people, like, I'm like, oh shucks, you went through that too. You got fired too, and you bounced back. It's so important that we share our story, our testimony, whatever it is, because sometimes we feel like we're the only person that went through. And when I start hearing it, and when I heard people say that's part of that's your experience, you need to tell that, I started stepping out more, being bold and brave. Honey, I say it now, I be cracking up, right? Because I thought that was like my job for a lifetime, but I was purposed to do something else. So me being transparent, it was hard when we talked about that earlier, because I was afraid of the judgment. I was afraid of, now they probably won't see me as successful because I got fired. I was afraid of, I used to say, I'm in transition. There's like, so what you transitioning to? Oh, I'm transitioning. Like every day I was trying to create a new sentence to the narrative, so I just didn't come out and say fired. Now I just say, hey, I was fired. Don't know why. I was fired. It almost wrecked my life. And then I share that story because here it is. What I find is that most people need this thing called hope. And when you breathe a little bit of hope into them, they feel like they can press on. So I said, hey, if my story give you hope, it's no shame in it for me. Because let me just tell you this, I wish somebody would have told me sooner about that. But everybody was making it seem like they was living their best life. And it was little old Tina trying to struggle and get back in the ring. And every time I try getting back in the ring, I'm telling you this, everybody that wanted me to do some work for them and talk for them and teach for them, they went silent. Once I got fired, they was like, oh, we don't want, it was like the plague was on me. So of course you want to hide it because you're trying to get your next best thing. But the beauty about it is, had I not gotten fired, I would not have opened my own private practice. So I opened my own private practice on an unemployment check and never went back, right? My goal was to go back. I wanted to go back and be in the health system, the hospitals, but every time I went, the doors was closing. And I don't know if you ever had the doors close on you. My fingers was in the way and the door slammed and it was like an ouch. And I still didn't want to move them because I wanted to get to that other side that I wanted to. And then I wound up being on this road. And I said, well, at least it'll make my resume look like I'm employed, right? And then I started, like, as the years started ticking, I was like, God, I think you might want me to stay here, but I don't want to stay here all day. And then I just really started embracing where I was at, because I think I really truly was living up to somebody else's expectations when we define success. If I got COO behind my name and VP, that means I made it, right? But then I had to really sit with myself and really define what success and making it look like, and be authentic and real with myself. And once I did that, that's when that whole transformation, that's when my inner voice and everything just started, inner child, inner voice, all that stuff just met up. And I cried like I was 2, not nose and all, scream. You ever had one of those cries that you just, you screaming, everything? If you had mascara on, it just like run. But let me just tell you, when it was over, I felt so much better.
Right.
And I knew I was ready to do what I was called to do. So just getting it out. And I forget the question that I answered. I know I done went all over the place, but I'm done.
We're here for this all over the place. Like, this to me is wellness. Wellness is around the mulberry bush. Wellness is organic. No two berries are alike.